Hi Booklovers, welcome back to my channel. I've got another sort of 2021 wrap-up video. Last week I did one talking about 2021 superlatives, and this time I'm going to be talking about books that took me by surprise. So these 9 books that I read last year, they took me by surprise in both good and bad ways, which means I either didn't expect to love it, but I did, or I expected to love it and I didn't. So these are going to include some of my more disappointing reads from 2021, not necessarily the worst books of 2021, but just the books that I can't believe I didn't love. I'm gonna start off on a good note. So this is a book that I loved and didn't expect to. It took me totally by surprise. It's a monster romance that I feel like I've talked about a million times on my channel already, so you can probably guess what it is. I mean, 2021 was the year that I discovered monster romances, omegaverse romances, reverse harem, and rejected mates, so you'll be seeing a couple of those in this list, but this first one is Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nascosta. So this one is a monster romance novella. I remember hearing about it on social media, like just when it was about to blow up. That's when I heard about it. I was like, excuse me, a Minotaur romance? This cannot be real. It was, so I immediately downloaded it and read it in about a couple hours and loved it. I had no idea what to expect. I don't think I read that many monster romances before this book, and I for sure had never read a hero who was literally a minotaur. I didn't expect to hate it or anything, but I definitely didn't expect to love it and give it 5 stars. It is a novella. It's like a little bit over 200 pages, but it's got such a good slow burn here. Usually I don't really like slow burn when it comes to shorter books because, you know, I don't have time for that, but it worked so well here. It's sweet and adorable and kind of wholesome despite the heroine's new job. So Violet, the heroine, is a very relatable heroine. She's in her mid-20s, she's a college grad, and she's struggling to find a job to make money. Then she comes across this ad to work at Morning Glory Milking Farm, and her new job is literally to milk minotaurs. She'll milk them at this facility because their sperm is commodified, and honestly it's pretty professional for the most part. And this world too that the author has created, it's got humans and monsters living, coexisting, having relationships together. So even though it was such a wild plot, it felt very normal for this book. The hero, Rourke, is one of Violet's new clients, if you can call him that, and it starts off very friendly. It's like a friends-lovers romance almost. They get to know each other over several weeks. They take the time to know each other, have these really cute conversations, and it honestly takes forever, like that's the slow burn part, before they even meet in person because there's always been a wall between them. But I thought that romance was so freaking adorable. Like I was just swooning. I was swooning over a freaking minotaur and just swooning over how good and sweet he was to her. It's a weird book. I mean, I can easily say that it's a very weird book, but I wholeheartedly loved it. Also, if you're wondering about this cover, it's a special edition from Hello Lovely box. It was a box from last year for their Halloween themed box. I love it. I mean, I love it so much more than the original cover. It is still on the nose with this milk jar, but it's got a much cuter vibe to it. For my next one, I'm actually gonna flip between books I unexpectedly loved and books that I was disappointed by. So for a book that I expected to love but I didn't, I was very disappointed by this one. It is The Neon Gods by Katee Robert. I expected to love this one because first, it's a Hades and Persephone retelling. I am the biggest sucker for these, but honestly I've come to the realization that there aren't actually that many good ones. There aren't that many good Hades and Persephone retellings. There's only been a few that really worked for me, and this one did not work. And second, I thought I loved Katee Robert, but I've also realized that I've slowly fallen out of love with her stuff, especially over her last few books. For Neon Gods, I had such a hard time even trying to read it. It took me like 3 tries before I actually finished this book. I put it down twice. It just wasn't gripping me. The story wasn't interesting, and I was struggling with the world building here. I wasn't sure if I was getting fantasy or contemporary. It's like a made-up world, but still contemporary. The city that Katee Robert created, it's ruled by regular people, but they call themselves the Greek gods. Like they're 12 humans, but their role is named after a Greek god. I had such a hard time wrapping my head around this because it just didn't make sense to me, or like I just didn't see the point of it. So the world building was a total fail for me. And the second reason is is more of a me thing, but I'm just not really into BDSM romances anymore. And there just wasn't anything new or special about the steam in this one to actually make me that intrigued. The whole plot of the book is Hades and Persephone putting on this scandalous BDSM show for Zeus because she doesn't want to marry him. And then another reason that this one didn't work for me was Hades' character. When I read a Hades and Persephone retelling, I like my Hades to be a lot darker than this Hades was. This Hades was pretty much a misunderstood cinnamon roll, which would be totally fine on its own if he wasn't like a Hades retelling, but I wanted him just to be a little bit darker than he was. I know the second book of the series just came out, and even though these covers are gorgeous, I really love the covers for the series. I don't think I'm gonna read it just because I don't think I'm gonna like them. Next on this list is a historical romance that I loved and didn't expect to. I was shocked at how much I love this one. It's Midnight Rider by Kat Martin, which I read for a video where I read 3 books, 3 historical romances that published in the year that I was born, which was 1996. This one has a beautiful 2-page stepback. It's a Western historical romance. I think that's part of why I didn't expect that much from it, because it's a Western. I honestly don't see that much love for Western historical romances anywhere really. It's mostly Regency or Victorian stuff, but I've come to realize that Westerns are actually so good. Like most, if not all the Westerns that I've read so far, I've loved. So this one is set in 1850s California. There's cowboys and horses and guns and everything. Very classic Western kind of stuff. I personally thought Kat Martin did an amazing job with creating this world. I don't really read the setting or this time period that often, but Kat Martin really made me feel like I was there. It's about a Spanish hero whose family's land was stolen by the heroine's uncle. Ramon and his brother are known as this outlaw who steals from the rich like the heroine's uncle to give back to their poor community. Because of one of their raids, Ramon actually ends up kidnapping Carly, the heroine. He treats her horribly in the beginning of this book. It's almost like reading a dark romance. There's a kidnapping. Ramon is a brutal hero, but luckily Carly isn't a weak heroine. She's not a pushover. She is so strong, and there's so much good fire and tension between these two. I loved how the relationship slowly developed. There's a lot of antagonism between them at first, and then there's some reluctant respect. There's a lot of lust between them, and then kind of against their wishes, because they're not meant to be, they fall in love. It gets so angsty and intense and emotional. It was so good. There's a marriage of convenience, some groveling, a ton of action and suspense as well. It just took me by surprise how much I love this book. I mean, when I go into a Western romance, I almost expect like a caricature of this Western setting. Like there's so many not good Native American romances out there, but this one felt really genuine. Kat Martin talks about these stolen lands, these poor struggling communities. It just felt very genuine and real to me, and of course there's a passionate romance, which I adored. But yeah, if you've been meaning to try like a kidnapping historical romance that's not actually a bodice ripper, read this one. Next is a book that I really expected to love, and I'm so sad I didn't. It's Her Soul for Revenge by Harley LaRue. This is the second book in the Souls trilogy, the sequel to Her Soul to Take, which was one of my favorite books from last year, so obviously I expected to love the sequel just as much. Sadly, I didn't. This one was really disappointing to me. I had a hard time getting into the romance at all. I really didn't feel the chemistry here. I didn't feel it at all between Juniper and Zane. I actually felt like Zane was way more into the romance, more invested in the romance than Juniper was. I almost feel like she didn't even fall in love with him at all. Like she was that hellbent on her revenge. So if you've read book 1 in this series, you pretty much know what happens in this book because it's literally a retelling of book 1, but just from a different couple's perspective, which obviously does not help this book at all because there's no suspense to this book. There's no excitement to it because you already know what's gonna happen, how it's gonna end. So the plot of this book is Juniper wanting revenge against this evil god-worshipping cult that almost killed her when she was younger. She makes a deal with the demon, with Zane, to help her get that revenge, and they have a ton of sex in the middle of getting that revenge. I hate to say it, but I got so annoyed with Juniper here. I really don't like characters who overestimate themselves, and because of this they put themselves and other people in danger, and that's exactly what Juniper does throughout this entire book. She's this tiny human who thinks that just because she has a gun she can take on like 10-foot tall deadly monsters, but literally all she ends up doing is getting herself hurt and then getting Zane almost killed constantly. She actually made me appreciate the heroine from book 1 a lot more, because I kind of complained that the heroine from book 1 didn't do too much, but at least she knew her limits. So as much as I expected to love this one because of how much I enjoyed book 1, the story was underwhelming. The romance I didn't really feel too much. It was sadly a disappointment for me. These next two are actually by the same author. It's an author that I discovered and loved last year. This first one is A Lady of Rookscreed Manor by Kathryn Moon. I actually have 2 copies of this book, the regular edition and the special edition from Hello Lovely box. This one came in the same box that Morning Glory Milking Farm came in, and the reason why this book took me by surprise was because it was a monster romance and because it was reverse harem. This was the first reverse harem romance that I read last year, and I had no idea what to expect. I'd never read it before. It was the first time that I read a romance where the heroine ended up with more than 2 guys. It was my first time reading Kathryn Moon, my first book from her, so I had no idea if she would be an author who worked for me. And adding the fact that all the heroes are some sort of monster, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I ended up loving it. I talked about it so much in my reverse harem romance video where I read reverse harem romances for the first time. It's basically a historical erotic paranormal romance where a heroine ends up with 5 monstrous heroes. It's like 80% smut, and I was totally here for it. I actually love that there are some more unique monster heroes here. Like, yes, there is your typical vampire, your typical shifter, but the shifter actually turns into a sphinx. And then there's a golem hero, a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and Invisible Man. So I ended up loving this concept. I loved the characters, I loved the romance, and obviously the steam was amazing. So this one took me by surprise in the best of ways. I found a new favorite author to love here, and since reading A Lady of Rookscreed Manor, I read like 4 other Kathryn Moon books. The other Kathryn Moon book that's on this list is a duet, actually. These 2 took me by surprise in a good way. It's Lola and the Millionaires parts 1 and 2. And the reason why this one is on my list is because it was the very first Omegaverse romance that I ever read. So last year, Kathryn Moon really introduced me to a lot of new stuff. I had heard of Omegaverse before reading this one. Like, I vaguely knew about it. I believed it was more like shifter stuff, but it turns out that there are some non-shifter Omegaverse romances out there. And these 2 books are non-shifters. They're like regular humans, but they just live in this alpha, beta, omega sort of society. But even though I'd heard of Omegaverse before, I didn't know what to expect. I still honestly don't know how I feel about it. I mean, I don't hate it at least, and I definitely liked these 2 books. The heroine Lola is a beta, which is like the least attractive, least wanted type of category. Lola actually has PTSD at the start of this book. She was abused by some previous alphas, so she's very wary of being around some other alphas. And these 2 books actually turn out to be a lot more emotional than I expected. Like, I expected the vibe to be more along the lines of A Lady of Rookscreed Manor, which was like 90% smut. That one was lighthearted and fun, but this one was a lot more emotional and intense, and it's Lola's story of slowly falling for and trusting these 6 guys who are all part of a pack. There are 4 alphas, an omega, and another beta. It's still super steamy, I will say, even with all the emotional stuff, because it is Kathryn Moon, but it was just a really new and unique read for me because I never read anything like this before. I never read this sort of world before, but it turned out really well. I think part of it is because it's Kathryn Moon and I really enjoy her writing, her storytelling. Her world building is so good, so she really sold this one for me. So for my first Omegaverse romance, I'm really glad that I went with a book by her. The next book on this list I really expected to love just because so many people that I know, that I trust, love this book. It's a mafia romance by an author who got very popular last year. It's Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. This one was really disappointing just because I had so high expectations for it. I mean, I love mafia romance, I love Marriage of Convenience, Enemies to Lovers, but it didn't really work out quite too well for me. I didn't hate it. I still give it 3 stars, so it's just okay. It definitely wasn't as good as everyone was telling me it was. So yes, I am very surprised. I did not end up loving this one. It's got a marriage of convenience between two rival mafia families who live in Chicago. Ida and Callum are forced to marry after Ida kind of sets Callum's house on fire, and then Callum breaks her brother's legs. So their parents force them to get married so that they can stop all this like family feuding, but the fighting doesn't actually stop between them. Like Callum and Ida constantly go head to head and literally try to kill each other. I was kind of into it in the beginning, but after a while it just started dragging and I was not feeling Callum's character. He is 10 years older than the heroine. He's supposed to be like this mafia prince, this mafia heir, and he did not feel like it at all. He didn't feel like a grown man. He didn't feel like he was this powerful heir to a mafia kingdom. He felt really immature to me, like all his antics when he and Ida are fighting, trying to kill each other. Her I was fine with because she's literally like 18 or 19, so her being immature, totally fine. So his character just didn't feel on par to what he actually was, and I kind of struggled with the romance too. The pacing of it was off just because they're fighting all the time and then all of a sudden they're in love. So I definitely didn't love this one as much as a lot of other people do, though I am glad that I'm not the only one who felt this way about this author. Like when I posted my Mafia Romances video, a lot of people also agreed with me, which I was really thankful for. Though I do want to give credit to my friend Lacey from Remarkably Lisa, because she was the only one who said that I wouldn't like Brutal Prince. She actually reminded me of this when I told her I was reading Brutal Prince, or when I told her how I felt about it. She was like, I told you that you wouldn't love this one, and I didn't believe her because there were all these tropes that I love reading in a mafia romance, but she was right. This next one I really didn't expect to enjoy, but I ended up loving it, and I've already like reread this book a couple times. It's The Alpha Tyrant's Rejected Mate by Katee Wells. This is a rejected mates shifter romance, werewolf romance. This is another first for me. It was the first time that I read a rejected mates romance. I had been curious about them because I see them all the time on Amazon. Although I will say, I feel like in a lot of them, the heroines don't actually end up with the guy who rejects her. She ends up with someone else, but this one, she actually ends up with the guy who rejects her. Honestly, I don't know why I'm surprised because it's a groveling romance, and you know how much I love those. Not that every single rejected mates romance is gonna be a groveling romance, but I'm sure there's more out there and I need to find them. But this one was so good. I also didn't expect to love it because the previous Katee Wells book that I read, Run Posey Run, I didn't really love. I gave that one 3 stars, so I didn't really expect to love another book by her. But this one was so good, even with the jerk hero. Like, Killian is a total ass for the entire first half of the book. He's the alpha of their pack and he rejects Una. He doesn't believe that she is his mate because she's a weaker member of the pack, she's disabled. But the reason why this worked so well is because Una isn't the kind of heroine who lets the hero walk all over her. She doesn't pine after him. She doesn't pine after a hero who doesn't want her. She actually is able to find someone to take out that mating bond. So she's not actually Killian's mate anymore, at least not at first. And soon enough, Killian realizes that he actually messed up big time. He ruined the best thing that ever happened to him before it even went anywhere. So Killian spends like the entire second half of the book groveling and trying to make up for the hurt that he caused, trying to make Una fall back in love with him. One big thing that I love in groveling romances is just how tortured the hero is when he realizes that he messed up. I always love to see a hero in some deserved pain, so this one worked for me so well. I shouldn't have been surprised by this one, but I was, and all I want to do is read more groveling rejected mates romances now. And the final book on this list, I'm sadly ending this list on a disappointing book. I really expected to love this one because I love the author, I love this world, but this one just didn't work for me. It's A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is a disappointment from last year, but again, it's not like the worst book. I did not hate it. I didn't actually hate any of the books that I mentioned in this video. I don't hate books that often anyway. But this one was a 3-star read instead of like the 4 or 5-star read that I expected. I love the Blood and Ash series, so I was very surprised surprised when I did not love the spin-off book. This is the first book in the spin-off Flesh and Fire series, and it was kind of underwhelming. It's another gigantic 600+ page book from Jennifer L. Armentrout, but whereas I really didn't mind the length in the Blood and Ash books, this one felt way too long. I had a hard time even getting into the story because it was so slow moving and I wasn't really in love with Sarah. She kind of felt like a Poppy 2.0, so that was a little boring to read. Sarah is another maiden like Poppy was, and her task is to make the Primal of Death, the hero, fall in love with her so she can kill him in order to save her people. The romance sadly just fell really flat for me. I wasn't feeling the connection between Sarah and Nikos. We have another similar storyline where the hero has this hidden identity from the heroine. He pretends to be someone else. It was good in From Blood and Ash because we didn't know who Cass was, but here we clearly know that the guy that Sarah is falling for is none other than Nikos, the Primal of Death. He's the guy that she's supposed to kill, so that kind of takes out the excitement and suspense out of this book. Nikos himself was just an okay kind of hero. I didn't hate him, didn't love him. He was just kind of there. I actually expected to love him because of what we read in The Crown of Gilded Bones. He was introduced there first and he was just very powerful and intriguing. I also didn't really care that much about the plot outside of Sarah trying to kill Nikos. It was just all about the background of the maidens and the primals, which I honestly didn't care about. And then the reveal at the end about Sarah, that was so predictable to me. So pretty much everything that I liked and that worked really well in From Blood and Ash, it just did not work in A Shadow in the Ember, which is surprising because it worked so well the first time, but I guess this one, it was just way too similar to From Blood and Ash to really enjoy. So yes, I was very surprised. I didn't love A Shadow in the Ember as much as the original series. And that is it for the most surprising books that I read last year. Let me know your thoughts if you've read any of them. If you want to share your own surprising reads from last year, please feel free to. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you all next time. Bye!